Thank you for joining us on another episode of Tea and Trowels. I'm your host, Emma, and today we'll be joined with Zackary Gilmore, professor at Rollins College. Thanks for joining us, and would you like to introduce yourself and your mug?
Sure, thanks for having me. As you just mentioned, my name is Zackary Gilmore. I am a professor of anthropology at Rollins College, and my mug today, you can see it says Best Dad in the Universe. It was a Father's Day gift last year from my 4-year-old, my favorite mug.
Oh, that is adorable. My mug is an attempt to be themed. It's not so great. It is the closest thing that I could find to orange pottery, but as you can tell, it is not pottery, and it's not really orange. It is a copper mug, but the idea was there. I guess orange just isn't really something I have in my house.
Well, I appreciate the effort.
I tried. A lot of thought went into trying to figure out how to make this work. Well, we'll get started on a few of our questions here. So first question is, why did you become an archaeologist?
That's an interesting question. I don't remember when exactly I started wanting to become an archaeologist. As far back into my childhood as I can remember, I sort of had that idea in my head. I actually had a friend from elementary school contact me for the first time in like 25 years a few months ago because he saw my name online and saw that I was an archaeologist, and he said, "Wow, you told me in 3rd grade you wanted to be an archaeologist." So I know as a child I watched a lot of bad archaeology movies, and you know, I read a bunch of bad books. And so I sort of had that idea in my head growing up. With that being said, though, I actually started off college as a film major, so I veered briefly. But I took a few business classes, realized that wasn't for me, and so I changed colleges, adopted an anthropology major, and that's sort of set me on this path.
Very cool. Where did you get your undergrad in anthropology at?
At Texas A&M.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was at a small school initially where I was majoring in accounting. And then I was looking for an anthropology program. I ended up at A&M, and I took a few classes there and realized that it wasn't just, you know, the adventure discovery side of archaeology I was interested in. I found, you know, the stories that archaeologists could tell really interesting, and that sort of locked me in, I think.
Awesome. All right, so in 30 seconds or less, could you tell us a bit about your research?
Sure. So I'm interested in the social history of later archaic people in the southeastern U.S. and especially in Florida. That was a time period that was really interesting because it was when some of the biggest shell mounds in the region were constructed in shell rings. That's when we first see pottery appear in the archaeological record. Long distance exchange networks are sort of going nuts at that time. And so I'm interested in questions like, you know, what sorts of communities did later archaic people form? What were the scales and functions of these communities? How did they interact with each other, especially over long distances? And I answered that primarily by looking at early pottery technology and how it was being manufactured and exchanged. And I sort of used that as a proxy for the movement and interaction of people.
All right. Do you have a site that you're working on specifically?
More of a region right now. So I've spent a lot of years work in the St. Johns River Valley, mostly in the middle part of the river valley, but I've moved a little further south for the last few years, and I am working in what's called the Upper St. Johns, even though it's in the south. And I've been doing a lot of work in the Charles H. Bronson State Forest, where there are, you know, over a dozen recorded shell mound sites that we know are sites, but have never really seen any research. And we don't know a lot about that region in general in terms of its pre-Columbian history. And so for the last few years, that's been a focus, and I hope to make that a focus for the foreseeable future.
Oh, very cool. So continuing on, what is your favorite tool in your toolkit?
So I was limited in terms of what I actually have available here, and I wanted to be able to show something. So I brought a couple things. The thing I'm going to stick with, though, is a field notebook, right? So I am a new convert to keeping a sort of old school field journal. Of course, I've always taken detailed notes on field forms, like while actually conducting field work. But when I came to Rollins, I started reading journals of archaeologists from the 70s and 80s who were at the college. And I found out there's such great information in there that would never make it into a field book or an actual field form. Because these are typically written, you know, after the day's work is done, when you're back at the field house or back at home, you sort of have time to reflect on what happened throughout the day. And so there's a lot of great details about the project and the work, but also about the people involved that have told me a lot about these projects that happened decades ago. So recently, I've been spending a lot more time actually writing notes in field books and drawing pictures, and I sort of made that a habit, and I found I really enjoy it actually.
Oh, that's really awesome. Do you actually have one of your little pictures in your notebook that you can show?
Oh, I am no artist at all. So,
Don't worry,
so
there'll be no judgment.
here's a picture of a bone pin.
Oh,
Little diagram. I have pictures of, there's a picture of a piece of later cake orange pottery. Um, yeah, and so I've actually started making students do this as well. I found it so valuable that every field school student, I pass them out a notebook at the beginning of class, and we talk about the types of notes they should be taking, and to make sure they're doing something similar. So that can be a permanent part of the record of the projects we're conducting at Rollins as well.
it's nice to get a little bit of even an anthropological background of what's happening on site. It's always interesting to know about almost like an anthropological study of the archaeologists at work, about who's working with who what day and all this kind of background information that's not going to be in the final reports.
Yeah, exactly. And I found that in student field journals from the past as well. There's some really great stories. And there's a lot of comments on sort of just the mood people are in, and then about low morale during certain days. So and it helps put you in the moment much more effectively, I think.
No, I love it. It's also a very large Right in the Rain. I don't think I've ever seen one that size before.
It is ridiculously large, but it worked out well because I've had it in the rain multiple times and it's still holding up. So I'll vouch for it.
Oh, gotta love Right in the Rain. All right, so continuing on with our next question, what is your best, worst field story? So something that you can laugh about now.
So as an undergraduate at Texas A&M, A&M wasn't doing a field school the year or the summer that I needed to get mine done. And so I ended up signing up for a field school through Texas A&M Corpus Christi. And I was working with an archaeologist I'd never met, and it was a project in San Patricio County in South Texas. It's a really rural area, like west of Corpus Christi, Texas. And it was really sort of rugged conditions, right? We were staying in tents in a cow pasture, and there really were no facilities. We had one water spigot that we used for everything, from washing dishes to showering to sort of filling our water jugs and everything. So it was brutally hot. And so I remember one particular day at this field school where it was really hot, and the students had been split into groups. And I was in the unfortunate group of students that didn't get the lunch cooler sent with it. And so our very rugged, old school archaeologist who was running the project, he said, "Don't worry, I'll find lunch." And so he takes off. 2 hours later, comes back with a watermelon. It's all he could find. He bought a watermelon from somebody on the side of the road. So we had some warm watermelon that day for lunch. And so by the end of the day, we were all, starving. Thankfully, we always got a good meal at the end of every day because we had made an agreement with a woman at a small Catholic church nearby that she basically made us dinner every night, and it was always fantastic. So that evening, right, we were starving. It was brutally hot. We were all sitting out in front of this Catholic church, sort of sitting on the curb. And everybody's trying to clean up a little bit so we don't destroy this little church when we go in. And as we're sitting there, people start looking around at each other, students, right? Because we all smell something that just isn't right. And then, the smell keeps getting stronger and stronger. We can't figure out what it is. Nobody's saying anything. We're just looking at each other. And then finally we look over at the archaeology professor, and he's taking off his shoe. But this isn't like a normal foot smell. We realize that, and then all of a sudden the smell hits him, and he looks down at his shoe, and he turns it and pours it out, and there was like a 6-inch long lizard that had been in the bottom of his shoe all day, that he had flattened in the beginning of the day and walked on it all day, didn't even notice. And then like it was flat as a pancake when he poured it out on the sidewalk. It was in the moment, it was really disgusting, right? We didn't know like what to say, like, who is this guy? But we did eventually go in and like ate like our lives depended on it because we were that hungry. But it's sort of that sort of epitomizes this guy in my mind, really, really rugged guy. He spent a couple of decades in the jungles of Panama. Like when he was young, he was in the Peace Corps, and so I mean, it didn't faze him at all. He acted like it was no big deal, but it was pretty incredible to everyone else.
I have no words. I thought this was going to be some sort of story about, you know, the watermelon and dinner was coming around and you guys had watermelon for dessert, or just some sort of lighthearted, I don't even know, but pouring out a dead lizard from the bottom of your shoe.
Yeah, and this wasn't like a tiny Florida lizard either. This was like a big, like almost foot, I mean, almost like as long as the shoe, like giant Texas lizard. It was amazing in some ways, now that I look back on it.
I'll get dirt in my boots and have to immediately shake it out because I can feel it all day. I feel like it's also the kind of Southwest archaeology vibe. I guess all my work I've done in the Southwest was always in the tent, middle of nowhere. If you didn't bring your cooler, you're kind of out of luck. So sounds interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, this field school was 8 weeks long in this cow pasture, and so it really, I mean, it helps students decide whether this career was for them, right? I mean, a lot didn't make it.
I can understand, especially after a lizard situation like that. So our last formal question for our interview is, how do you think that archaeology can save the world?
I actually really like this question. This is something I have my students think about and write about in almost every class, because I'm a pretty strong believer that archaeology can change the world if we allow it to. And so I think really, I mean, archaeology can help address a lot of contemporary world issues very directly, right? And so I think one way we see that a lot is with the archaeology of climate change. I mean, the only way that we know that contemporary climate change is unusual is looking in the past and seeing how it's changed in the past, right? And so I think we can also look into the past at the way people were dealing with issues like climate change, and we can learn some lessons from those people. We tend to, I think, believe that our modern lives are very different than everything that came before. But really, most of the problems that we deal with in today's world, like climate change or warfare or immigration, these are things that have always existed. And so there are lessons to be learned if we actually look to the past for that. And there are some, I think, Florida archaeologists who do a really great job of connecting the past to the present. People like Ken Sassaman at the University of Florida, Ed Gonzalez-Tennant at UCF, their work, I think, is really explicitly geared toward changing the world in those ways. Less directly, and one of the things that draws me to archaeology, and always has, is the ability of archaeology to bring people into the past that are often left out of it. And so indigenous people, enslaved people, women, people that are often written out of traditional historical narratives, archaeology is really effective at bringing back in and trying to challenge sort of dominant narratives or sort of taken for granted narratives about the past. I think archaeology is fantastic at that. And then overall, I think, I mean, archaeology is such a fundamental, or the past is such a fundamental component of our current cultural identity. Sort of how we know who we are is by knowing who we were, who we have been, right? And so I think people bond over shared history. And if archaeology can contribute to building those histories, then I think, you know, that's a really important contribution.
I mean, I can't not disagree. You, correct me if I'm wrong, did get to do a little bit of work on a site that was being directly impacted by climate change in Florida a little while ago, the coastal site.
Yeah, so this past summer, the field school I did through Rollins College, it included Rollins and UCF students, and we're working on a site called Heifer Mound, a site in the Charles Bronson State Forest. Is a pristine shell mound in terms of it hasn't been excavated by archaeologists, it hasn't been looted, but it is suffering some pretty severe erosional damage from water rising and from storm damage along the St. Johns River. And so artifacts are spilling out. And one of the reasons I chose that site this past summer is because I thought we could do what we can to record some information about the site in case it doesn't exist in the future. And also we can sort of help keep track of that damage. So we created a really detailed topographic map of the site. We mapped out the damage, and we're going to try to keep track of that sort of erosional face over the next several years, and see how it goes, right? See if that can be mitigated in any way, or whether sort of we just have to learn what we can from that site, knowing that it's going to go away.
I think that's a lot of the archaeology in Florida for our attempts to figure out what's going to happen to these sites with climate change and erosion. I think it's really critical right now to be able to record those sites and to record their erosional rates, see how long we have until these sites are gone. And so our last question is, what is keeping you sane during quarantine?
That's another good one. So I mentioned that I have a 4-year-old son, right? So he is at home full time right now, and that's occupying most of our free time here at the Gilmore house. I've been trying to stay busy with projects around the house. One thing I've been doing though that sounds sort of strange, but I found it, strangely therapeutic. I've been reading a lot of like post-apocalyptic fiction. Um, and so I go through cycles where I'm not reading a lot of fiction, just because I get bogged down and a lot of the more academic reading. But I really enjoy reading fiction, and I think I actually write better when I'm reading it. But recently, I read The Stand, the Stephen King book, The Stand. I'm finishing up a trilogy by a guy named Justin Cronin, which is a trilogy about some government engineered disease that gets out and it doesn't go well. I think by comparison, right, the situation in the books is always worse than what we're dealing with. So in that way, that may explain why it's helpful.
Makes you feel a little bit better. It's not as bad as it could be.
Yeah, I think things could get much worse.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on our little Tea and Trowels episode. Thanks for coming, and have a great day.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right, tune in next time. Bye.